and then God will handle it from there.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? We okay? Glad you're here this morning. And I don't know, as I hear these stories and I see the season we're in, I don't know about you guys, but there's just kind of that memory that you have of like things that were new at one time. And you kind of go back to like, what was it like for people who had new experiences before us, right? So when I was younger, I remember my grandfather, he had this Model T that was stashed in the back of a shed in the back of his property. My grandfather was a farmer, and he had a massive, massive farm. It actually went from Texas through the Oklahoma Panhandle all the way up to Kansas. So it covered 3 states, and he had started working this farm when he was 9 years old. And his brother and him moved there with their mother. She got the black lung, like she literally got the dust storms and everything had made it so that she could not stay on the farm. And from the time he was 9 till the time he died in his 80s, he was farming this same land and grew the property. And I remember, like, as we would go through the property, there would be all these big sheds and all these like archaeological facts, right? You'd see all these things that were like, these are old. What is this? What is this thing that you've got in here? So it was old tractors, and old trucks and all kinds of stuff. And I remember in the back of the shed, there was this Model T. Now, it was always buried beneath all this other stuff, and it was always kind of just shoved in the back. And I went one time, and I was trying to uncover it because I was thinking, I've never seen a Model T like this before. I've never seen one that's just like in the wild. You see them where they're like behind ropes and they're behind barriers, and they say do not climb on them or whatever. But I was like, I want to like see one. I want to get close to one. And so I started unpacking it and unburying it. He found me. My grandfather found me as I was doing this. He was not thrilled about it because I had just messed up his entire shed. But we started talking about it. I asked him, I was like, so this is a Model T. Like, this is the first truck, right? And he was like, yeah. And he said, and I said, now you got one, right? Like, you got this truck. You had this truck. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember going to buy this truck. He said, Kevin, we did not like trucks. I did not like it. And I said, why not? Like, why wouldn't you want a truck? If you could have a truck, why wouldn't you want a truck? Like, these are brand new automobiles. This is perfect for what you do on a farm. He said, oh, I did not like the truck at first. And he said, the first time we went to go pick up the truck, now his brother was only 13 years old, and they went to go buy a truck, and he was 13, my grandfather was 11, and so they bought the truck. Again, it was a different time. They bought the truck, they drove the truck back home, and as they were driving it to their house, my grandfather was sitting in the back of the truck. He was sitting in the bed, and he said, no joke, very first thing that happened, my brother went to put the thing in gear. He hit the gas. I was in the bed of the truck, and as soon as he hit the gas, I just fell right out the back. He's like, that's my very first experience with the truck. He was like, I didn't really care for it. I thought, I don't know if I like these as much. A horse had never done that to me the way that this truck had just done it to me. And he was like, I wasn't a big fan. Now, for all of us, when we experience new things, I think that some of us, we think, oh, I love new stuff. I love it when new things come along. I love this when new seasons happen, when new things come along, when technology changes, when my moving situation, like where I'm living, my moving situation changes, my career changes. We love the new stuff. And the truth is, I don't think we do quite as much as we think we do. Some of us know that about ourselves, right? Some of us know we do not like change. Some of us just know it. Some of us think we don't know it, but we might have it deep down inside that we also don't love change. My kids are this way. Like, I have my daughter who, if she does something one way one time, it will be that way forever. So if you went to a theme park, if you went to a school event, whatever, and you did it this way last time, like you walked this direction or you had this order of events, the next time she's expecting it to be exactly like that. She's just like, okay, so we start here, and then we walk around this way, and the order of events is this way. She has it exactly like that in her head. Now, my son is the opposite. He just loves new things. Like, just for the sake of new things, he's just out there trying everything, and it drives both of them crazy. It's amazing how the same genetics can make up 2 totally different humans. You who are parents know how this goes, right? And the thing is, like, Jane will always be that person who likes things in that same structure, so I guarantee she will marry somebody who does the opposite and vice versa. But there's like that thing in us, right? Some of us love that stability. And the truth is, in our brains, we see this. There are actual chemical reactions that show that the way your brain responds to something the first time is how it will respond to it the next time too. This is what happens. It's called neural pathways, right? And it's just this thing where when you experience something the first time, however you reacted to it, whatever your brain did with that, it starts to literally create a pathway in your brain. There is a pathway made in your brain of almost like a river or like a chemical little river of that, how your brain is being formed to that event. And it will stay there. It will be that way the next time. My grandmother, I asked her one time, my sweet grandma, she lives in Ohio, if she knew how to work the internet. I wish she would watch this, but she has no idea. And she's so sweet. And she told me one time, I remember she never drank soda, ever. No way. Now, she would buy it for all of us, but she would never drink it. You know how grandmas are, right? And so she would buy all this soda. She would never touch it. I'd be like, I asked her one time, Grandma, why don't you drink soda? And she said, well, I remember my first time that I ever had Pepsi. And everybody's talking about it. Like, it's like this new thing. You're going to love it. It's super cool. It's great. Everybody loves Pepsi. And she said, and I took my first drink of it. I was so excited. She said, I sipped it up through a little straw in the glass bottle. And she said, it made my nose tingle so bad. I sneezed for like 30 minutes. I decided I'm never having soda again. She didn't like that. Whatever her brain did that first time, she was like, I'm done. I'm out. That was it, right? But then there are some times that we can learn to adapt to something new. See, only in the last about 30 years have we found the science of your brain finding this thing called not pathways, but neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is something that actually says that your mind can literally change. Your brain can actually change. Those pathways that you have created can actually shift. They can actually go a different direction. You have the power to literally change your mind. This is the difference, by the way, between the mind and the brain. If you ever get into the science of this, it's very interesting. But there is a difference between a mind and a brain, and the belief is that the mind can control the brain. Up until about 30 years ago, we thought the brain was in control of everything. But it turns out you have a thing called a mind, and the mind controls the brain. This is why the Bible actually uses a different word besides brain when it talks about renewing your mind. Yeah, because what's in control? Your mind is in control of your brain, right? This mind thing is very important. And we have to understand that there are not just neural pathways, there is neuroplasticity, which means things can actually change. The problem is that we get very comfortable in the pathways we've created, right? We get really confident in those pathways we've created. We like the familiarity of them. We like the way they feel. That's what this whole series, really what we're looking at right now, is this idea of no turning back, because there are so many things that we have become accustomed to, we've become comfortable with, we've really become confident in them. They just stay the same. And we like that sameness. We feel comfortable in that sameness. We don't like to move beyond that sameness, do we? And right now we're in a season, and I know I don't have to tell you about this. We are in a season where your career probably looks different than it did before this. Something in it. Could be the way you do your job, could be the job you had, just like Amy was talking about. Could be things that maybe your finances just have changed. There's been some shifts. It could even just be the fact that you are more nervous about your job than you were before. I hear this one all the time. Just the anxiety that comes with the fact that you have a job and you're like, I want to keep that job. And I know there's a lot of downsizing going on. There's a lot of things happening. We've heard so many stories inside of our church of people losing jobs, and it's heartbreaking. People who have lost careers during this time. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see all the time and energy we pour into these things. And the truth is, we have so much anxiety because we're trying to keep it the same as it was, right? That's what we're trying to do. We want to keep it the same as it was. We like that in our families. Maybe you have a different situation with school right now with your kids. Maybe school looks different than it did before. It does for a lot of people. And maybe that's the truth of how things are working. I know right now here on campus, there have been a lot of changes at this college that I've been talking to people about. I know that some of you with your kids, whether you're keeping them at home or you have more school at home than you did before, or your extracurricular stuff looks different than it did before, whatever, all of that looks different. Your family life, I guarantee you, looks different than it did 6 months ago. I guarantee it. Now, it could be better or worse, but something is different. In your marriage, something is different than it was 6 months ago. We're heading into this new way of doing things. And the thing is, most of us want to resist that because we have the pathway the way it was, and we don't want to change it now. Right? We like the way it was. But I would challenge that in the Bible, we see God doing new things all the time. I think we read it as an ancient text, which is when God used to do things. And I think we have to read it as a living text, which means God is still doing things. And we have to make the decision that we are going to move forward into whatever it is that God has for us, and we are not going to turn back. So today, what I want to do real quick, I want to read a passage out of Isaiah. I promise this actually will not take super long. But this passage, for me, is one that I go back to it time and time and time again. It's one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. And I just want us to go through this for a second. I want to read it with you. It's in Isaiah 43. If you have a Bible or a phone, whatever. Isaiah 43, we're going to start in verse 13 is where we're going to begin. But Isaiah 43, this is what it says. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to start in verse 15. It says this, I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's creator and your King. And this is what the Lord says, he who made a way through the sea, a pathway through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Then he says, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Now this, again, one of my favorite passages. And what's happening here is Isaiah is writing. See, I've read this verse wrong through most of my life, just to be honest with you. Through most of my life, I read this verse as Isaiah writing to the Israelites, to the Hebrew nation, writing to them in a way where he's saying, hey guys, things were bad. Remember how bad things were? And now they're going to be better. Does that make sense? That's the way I've read it. Is that many times we look at this and we say, forget the former things, because they were all bad things. They were all things that were negative. They were bad experiences. He's saying, forget the former things. And that's the way that I usually read it. Because it's easy for us to want to forget the mistakes, right? It's easy for us to want to forget the former things that were bad. Yeah, we all want to block that out of our memories. But what he's saying here is actually not forget the former things that were bad. He's actually saying, forget the former things that were good. See, Isaiah is written in three different parts. There's the first Isaiah, which is the proto-Isaiah, if you will. It's the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, and it's written before the Israelites are taken into captivity. If you ever, just by the way, are ever in a moment where you feel like, I am uncertain of this moment, I am unfamiliar with this moment, I am uncomfortable in this moment, welcome to being the people of God. Because that's the whole story of the Bible. Remember how we started this whole thing where we were looking at 40 years or 400 years, of slavery in Egypt, where the Israelites were in slavery for 400 years. Talk about uncomfortable, unfamiliar, some things that were bad going on in their lives. And then God rescued them through the water, right? He takes them through the Red Sea. Remember, after that, they spent 40 years in the wilderness, in the desert. 40 years, they're in uncertainty, uncomfortable situations. And then God, again, leads them through the waters, leads them through the sea. We looked at this last week in Joshua into the promised land. And now they've been living for actually a couple hundred years. They've been living in this new land, this promised land. Things have been going really well. Things have actually been going really good. In fact, they've become, at this point, maybe at one point in this, they were the most profitable and prosperous nation in the world. They had come through King David, King Solomon. They had become a place of shipping, like mercantile, and like they had all kinds of things going on for them. They were doing very, very well financially. They were doing very, very well as a country. They actually had a lot of good things going for them. But here's what happens, and this is just true of the Bible. Anytime you read the Bible, anytime you look at the patterns of the Bible, is as soon as the oppressed become the oppressor, then God will always let them fall. That's just a fact. And they had forgotten the original calling that God had put on them. Remember, the original calling was through Abraham, that you will be blessed to be a blessing. They loved the being blessed part. They forgot about the being a blessing part. And God lets them fall. And Babylon comes in. And so that first 39 chapters of Isaiah is a warning to Israel, saying, hey guys, if we don't get our act together, it's going to be bad. It's going to look ugly for us. We will fall. And what happens after chapter 39 and in chapters 40 really through 54, it's called Deutero-Isaiah. And that second piece is written after they have been taken into captivity, after they have been taken into slavery once again by Babylon this time. And they're back in that uncertain, unfamiliar place, right? They're right back where they started. And God has let this happen to them, and now here they are. And we're not reading this. Remember, we're not in Proto-Isaiah, we're in Deutero-Isaiah. We're after the chapter 40 mark. And really the last bit, if you get into it, the Trito-Isaiah, which is 55 through 66, that might be a whole other author, to be honest. We're not sure who really wrote that. But this section right here is so important, because when we read it through that context, what we realize is he's not writing saying, remember all the bad things that happened to us. Remember? That would have been if they were in the good part, when things were good for Israel. He's writing saying, look back at all the good things that happened to us and forget the former things. Again, we want to get rid of the mistakes part. Like, yes, let's forget all the mistakes we've had. Let's forget all the bad things. But he's saying, no, you need to forget even the miracles. You need to forget even the good things. This is hard for us to do. Look at the season we're in. Maybe before this happened, maybe before these last 6 months, things were actually pretty good for you. There might have even been some things that were better than where you are right now. Just saying. Maybe you were making more money. Maybe your family felt like it was in a better rhythm. Maybe your marriage was in a better place. Maybe your career looked a little bit more stable. Maybe there were things that looked better before this. There might have actually been some good things. I mean, I feel that all the time when I look at our church. I mean, there were things that were much easier before this started. There were things that were much simpler. People were not as divided or divisive. People were not as scattered. I mean, right? We could pretty much rely on everybody coming into this room and we'd see most of you, and now we have to find other ways to do this. Now, here's the thing is we could look at that and say that everything now is bad. But if we read this verse in context, we realize that we have to forget even the good things and we have to just move forward in faith. That what is coming next is better than what's behind us. There is a certain amount of just optimism, I believe, that comes with being a follower of Jesus. I know that sounds simple-minded. I know. I get how that sounds. But I believe that there is just a simple idea of optimism that we as followers of Jesus are just supposed to have. I'm not saying we shouldn't think analytically or think critically about things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't be realists about the world and what's going on. But there is just a certain amount of when we follow Jesus that we have to be able to set aside the former things and trust that whatever lies ahead of us is better than what's lying behind us. Even the disciples, what did they do when they started to see the end of their lives coming ahead of them? Right? They're literally being persecuted, being killed in Rome for their beliefs. And why did they let that happen to them? Why were they killed? Because even in that, they believed that eternally what lied ahead of them was better than what was behind them. There's just a certain amount of optimism. I've been struggling with it, I'll be honest with you. We've been reading some different leadership books with our elders, with our staff, and in those leadership books, it talks about this optimism, and I've been like, ooh, I don't have a lot of that right now. I don't know if you can relate in your scenario, where it's like, oh, optimism's not high at this point in my life. 2020 was not like an optimistic year, not up and to the right. But I believe there's just something about us that's supposed to have this simple optimism, just believing, if we really have faith, that whatever it is, even if the good stuff is behind us, that there's something even better ahead of us. And that's what's happening here in Isaiah. And so what I want to do real quick, I want to just walk through this passage and kind of take it apart, because I think what Isaiah does here is brilliant. And I want to tell you, for me, this verse has meant a lot. So let's go back to verse 15, okay? We're just going to walk through this real quick. It says, I am the Lord, your Holy One, Israel's Creator and your King. Notice God's introducing himself again. And I love the way he introduces himself. I am the Lord, your Holy One. Like, you have this personal relationship with me. And then he says, Israel's Creator. I love that he reminds them. This whole thing that you think you've come up with, this nation, this Israel thing, that was actually my idea. That was actually my invention. Why does he have to remind them of this? My opinion is the longer that we have something under our control, the more we think we were in control of it in the first place, right? We have this idea, whether it's your career. I have people say this all the time where they're like, God really set me up in this career and he really gave me this job. But notice as your career progresses and it goes up and to the right and you get promotion after promotion, then you start to be like, but I did that part. God got me into this thing, but I mean, my incredible wit and talent is obviously what's moving me up the ranks. Or you're like, why am I still stuck down here? What is it that's keeping me down at this level? God provided me this place. Why isn't he providing more than this? And maybe, just maybe, that same God who got you into that spot has you in this spot for a reason. But the longer we have something, the more we think we're responsible for it. It was ours. And I guarantee you, Israel now, at a few hundred years of being a country, has been like, no, we did all this. This is ours. We own this responsibility of whether it's good or bad. Let me just say this. There's a great, T.D. Jakes once said this great line. He said, be very careful to take too much credit for what you've done, because then you will feel responsible to take all the blame. And he said, but the opposite is true too. Be careful taking too much blame for what you've done, because you'll be tempted to take all the credit as well. Especially true when it comes to us, right? We take a lot of the blame, but we also sometimes love to take all of the credit. And we have to give credit where it's due. And what's happening here is God saying, I'm Israel's creator. And you might think of God as an eternal creator, meaning he created everything there was, and then he just like left it alone. And he created once. I think we have this idea in our heads that God is an eternal creator who created everything one time, and now it's all over. Creation has stopped. He did the creation. It is now over. That was a story that happened, and now we're like just living with the creation that is. I don't believe that. I think what he's saying here is, I am the creator. I continue to create. Not am I the eternal creator. I am eternally creative. And I believe that there are so many times where God is just like 10 steps ahead of us, 20 steps ahead of us. And he's like, hey, would you just figure it out? Like, I'm ahead of you. Don't think that I'm this ancient God who's just barely able to walk and kind of keep up near you. And I think we see God as that, like this old decrepit man who just barely can kind of hang on to our coattails because we're moving so fast and we're so smart. We have all these advancements. Look at us. And I think we think God's just barely holding on to our coattails. I think often God is on the other side. He's like got like a leash and he's like, hey, come with me. Please just follow me. I will gladly lead you, but you're so far behind the plans that I'm setting up for you. And he's saying, I'm the creator. I'm the king. Remember, at this point, Israel has had kings, but he's saying, no, I'm the king. I am your king. He reintroduces himself, and it says, this is what the Lord says. And notice this is big. He says, he who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters. Again, we've talked about this over the last 2 weeks. We know exactly what Isaiah is referencing here. He's talking about when God led his people, one of the most important stories in the entire Bible, by the way, through the Red Sea, out of Egypt into a promised land. We see twice that water is crossed, right? He says, that's what I am. I am the God who made a way. He made a way. Now, for the Hebrew understanding, by the way, this story, the story of the Red Sea, is so foundational to the rest of the Bible. There are scholars who would say that is the most important story, not just in the Old Testament, but in the Bible. Just that story sets such a precedent for the entire rest of the Bible, that one story. And it says this story for the Hebrew people, it is personal. It is a personal story. See, we read it as like, that it was good that happened to them. That seems cool for them. Think about this if it was your parent or grandparent telling you this story, and it was handed down from their parent, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. I mean, it's been handed down from generation to generation to generation, and it's not just their story, it is your story. This is where you came from. This is a personal story. I believe that every single one of us has this story. Somewhere in our past, we have a story where God has done something where he made a way in your life. I believe that. Every single one of us has a story. It could be something with your children. It could be something with your finances. It could be something with a job. It could be something in your marriage. It could be even moments that are just heartbreaking moments where God has made a way. I believe every one of us has a story like that. Yesterday, I was out talking to some folks and I remember one of the ladies started telling one of these stories. She was talking about her faith and how rattled it was and how strong it became because she went through a house fire. They lost almost everything, but only a few things survived. And she was telling me the things that did survive and how God had provided for them, even in the midst of such a tragedy, that their family was safe. And you could feel it. Like, as she's telling the story, you're like, that's your made a way story. You know what I mean? Like, that's your story. God made a way. I think all of you have this story somewhere in you. I believe we all hold dear to those stories, and they are good stories. They are important stories. There was a miracle that happened in your life at some point. There is a miracle that God has done. I believe that with all of my heart. I actually don't think you sit here today unless you've had a miracle of some sort in your life where you really believe that God intervened. This is such an important moment, this miracle moment. And Isaiah is reminding them of this, looking back. He's saying, remember, guys, remember this moment. This is the most important moment of our collective lives. Let's look at that moment. Let's remind ourselves of the faithfulness of God. And he says in verse 17, he goes on, he who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. He's going like, guys, remember this story. Hold on to this story right now. You need this story. Remember all the great hits. This is one of the greatest hits we had. This is a big one. And he's saying like, this is it. But then notice the very next verse, the very next word. And then he says, forget. Forget the former things. Forget it. And you're like, is that a typo? Like, did he mess up here? Like that shouldn't happen. When we're talking about all the great things God has done, the next verse should not say, forget. Forget the former things? We should be talking about, no, remember them all. Write them all down. Keep them all. He's saying, no, forget the former things. Again, he's not talking about the bad things. He's even talking about the good things. Forget the former things. This is hard for us. And I don't think he's saying forget what God did. Don't get me wrong here. I don't think he's saying forget what God did. I think he's saying forget how God did it. Because you're out here looking for the same thing. You're out here looking for God to act the way he did then, now. And God's not going to do the same thing now that he did then. It's going to look different. It's going to be different. And I think what happens is we continue to look for God to work the same way that he did before, and what we end up worshiping is a system and not a savior. Because we're like, well, remember he did it this way before. Remember how he acted before. Church people, we're the worst at this. We are the worst at this. I can't tell you how many times I have heard us try to go back to things the church used to do. And we want to go backwards into what the church was doing. I'm not saying those things were bad. If we want to look at tent meetings and revivals and moments that, my dad, he sang in the 4-piece, gospel quartets. And I'm not saying any of that's bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Those were bad things. But I'm saying what we tend to do as church people is we tend to look backwards. And what Isaiah is saying here is you need to look forwards. That God's doing something new. And if we continue to move backwards, we're not going to see it. Sometimes the biggest barrier to seeing God's miracles is the way that God used to do his miracles. Sometimes the biggest barrier to seeing what God's doing now is to look back at what God did then. Because we only want him to operate the same way every single time. And he's saying, no, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past, even when those things were good. Because again, I believe he's saying there's something even better now. Forget the former things. And again, we love this verse when this verse talks about our past and the bad things, right? We love it when it's like, forget the mistakes. It's hard when it's talking about forget the miracles. He's saying, forget those things. We are in a new time, a new era, a new even pattern of how God's going to work. And you've become comfortable and you've become familiar with the old way. And God is not a God of the old way. He is a God of the new way. And he's going to do new things right now. And notice after that, he goes on. He says, see, see, which is this word, in some translations you might see the word behold. I love this word, like behold. Behold, like it's like a stopping point. It's the word hene in Greek, and the word hene means like full stop, like stop everything before it, stop everything after it, like just full stop, full stop. I am doing a new thing. I'm doing a new thing. And he says, now it springs up. And he says, do you not perceive it? I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? I love this because it's like he's saying, hey, I'm going to do it whether you see it or not. I'm already working. This is why we sing like, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working, right? He's still working. You might not see it. That's not his responsibility for you to see it. It's his responsibility to keep doing things, and he is continuing to do things. The question is, will you see it? I remember when we had our daughter, when we had Jane, that was not on our timeline, the way it worked. God took a lot longer than we expected. And so after Jane was born, the immediate thing is, if you have parents like Marie's parents, the next question was like, so when do we have more grandkids? Like, you got one figured out. How many more can we get out of you? Kind of thing. And we were like, oh, we're just taking it slow here. One was enough for a while. And so we really believed that God would take a little while with the second one. We kind of thought he might take some time. Took us a few years for the first. Why not for the second? That's not how it works, apparently. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but God's miracles never happen on your timeline. They just don't. They never do. I would beg you to tell me how many miracles that you've had in your life that God has done on your timeline. I would say almost never. Why? Because we're bad at perceiving what he's doing. Anyways, he told, he gave us this first child. We were so excited. And then just a few months later, just a few months after we had Jane, I remember that we got the news that we were having another one. And I wasn't even like grateful. Like, I was like, oh no. Oh my. And so Marie's parents were coming out to visit for Christmas, and we had just found out we were having this second one. And so we thought we should at least make the best of it, right? They've been waiting on a second already for some reason. They're ready for a second child. So we were excited. So Jane was only like a year and a half or a year old. And so we made a little onesie that she would wear. And we decided, Marie did this little puffy paint thing on it. It was real cute. And it said, going to be a big sister, and it said August 2012, and it was like, and we thought, oh, this will be a fun way to let the grandparents know, right? We'll put this on Jane. She'll wear it out in the living room. She'll see the grandparents. They'll be like, hey, Jane, you're real cute. What's that on your shirt? What? We're having another baby? Like, that's what we thought would happen. And so we went into the room. We changed Jane into the little onesie. We had our phones ready to video the whole moment because it was going to be so great, right? We were going to warm hearts all over Facebook after this. And so we had the whole thing ready to go. And Jane comes kind of waddling out of the little room, and she goes and sees her grandparents. She's got the onesie on. They pick her up, and they're carrying her around, and they're having a great time with her, and they're just laughing and just so happy to see Jane. And this goes on for like a few minutes. And then we're like, should we turn the phones off? Like, I don't know how long it's going to take. And then another few minutes pass. We're like, okay, it's been like 10 minutes now. I don't know if they're going to notice. And we just keep the phones running. Nothing's happening. They're not saying a word about it. They're looking right at Jane. They're holding Jane. They're looking at everything. Nothing's happening. And finally, we turn the phones off, and we just kind of are waiting around, just watching. They've got to have a reaction sooner or later. They've got to catch on to what's happening, right? And they just keep holding Jane and keep passing her around. It's been an hour now. And our excitement has really dwindled, and also our concern for their eyesight has gone way up. Like, I know they're getting older, but this is ridiculous, right? And so we're getting very worried about it, and they just keep passing Jane around. And finally, Marie had enough because her, the cuteness factor that she had worked so hard on was going away. And she was like, hey guys, did you notice Jane's onesie? And they were like, oh yeah. And they held her out, and they're like, oh yeah, it says here like big sister. August 2012. We're like, do you get it? Like, do you get what's happening? And they're like, I mean, no, like, she has that onesie on. And we're like, she has the onesie on. If she's going to be a big sister, what does that mean? And they're like, well, she'd have to have a little sibling. Yeah, she's going to have another sibling, and she's going to have one, and you don't even care. And we were like getting angry at this point, and they were like, oh, oh yeah, we get it now. We get it now. We were like, what did you think it meant? And no joke, her mom looks at us and she's like, well, I know you guys in the past have done some consignment shopping. I thought maybe you bought a onesie at a store, like a Goodwill. I was like, I've been a pastor for a long time. We don't make a ton of money, but what? Yeah, we were just out there buying onesies that say Big Sister, August 2012, which is still in the future, by the way. I don't know what else we could do. We felt we had telegraphed the entire situation as cleanly as a human can do, yet what they said was, oh, we didn't think you would possibly have another one this quickly. We didn't think you would possibly have another one like this fast. That's crazy. Yeah, it is. I believe that sometimes God's doing the same thing. I believe he's made some things where he's like, this is as clear as I can make it. I'm doing a new thing. I don't know what it takes to get your attention. I don't know if it takes literally a global pandemic. I don't know if it takes massive amounts of protests. I don't know if it takes political changes. I don't know what it takes to get your attention, but I'm doing it. The problem is you're not perceiving it. The problem is you have made a pathway that I have made for you before. You're looking at the pathway I made for you earlier on in your life. You're looking at the pathway that I put in front of you, and you keep looking at that pathway. Meanwhile, I'm making a new one. I'm making a new way, and you keep looking back at the old ways while I'm out here trying to say, there's a new one. There's a new one. Just look at it. Look at the onesie, for crying out loud. Put it together in your minds. I don't know what else it takes to get through to you, but I'm making a new path. It's not just our brains that make paths that go the same way every time. It's our hearts too, isn't it? And we want things to look the same as they did. We want things to feel the same way as they did. And the truth is, God is sometimes saying, I have done everything I can to show you that I'm going a different direction. There is a new path. Notice that what he even says there, he says in that verse, he says, I'm making a way in the wilderness. I'm making a way in the wilderness. He's making a new way through the wilderness. And then he says, and I'm making a stream in the wasteland. No, this is just a fun fact. Just think about this for a second. Notice where we started this story. We started with God taking his people to the water and leading them through to the wilderness. Notice that he's saying this is the exact opposite. I'm not taking you to the water and leading you to the wilderness. I'm actually leading you to the wilderness, and I will bring you the water. This is the exact opposite of what they're looking for. It's the exact opposite. I'm sure that like you and me, there are things in our lives that we get really anxious about when stuff like this happens. And I remember years ago, this is a few years ago, I felt that God, I was reading this verse like almost on a daily basis, to be honest with you. I felt like God was saying, there's something new I want you to do. There's something new that's going on. And he was asking me if I could feel it, if I could perceive it, if I saw it. And I was working at a church. I had a very, very great position at a very large church. I mean, a position that somebody my age should have never had. And I was doing really well there. And everything was comfortable and familiar, and things were good and up and to the right. Everything felt good. And I remember God speaking so clearly, like, Kevin, I need you to think about this new thing that I'm calling you into. And so it was over a Christmas trip. We went to go see my family in Texas, and I got this flu that was like the worst flu in the world. It was just unbelievable. I was in really bad shape. And just long story short, at one point in that flu, my sister, I had to stay at her house in quarantine myself. And my mom just gave me some clothes that were in my sister's house to wear. And I didn't even realize it for about 3 days that I was wearing my sister's yoga pants and a long sleeve t-shirt she had. And guys, that's what kept me alive. I was like, I cannot die. And my kids find out that their father died wearing his sister's yoga pants. You know, you just can't, that's not how I'm going out. And so I had to survive, if for no other reason, for my dignity and for my legacy. And so we went through this flu. It was terrible. We flew to Florida after that. And we decided we were going to visit a church here in Florida. And to be honest, the church was going to be a different scenario for me. It was, by all career accounts, and I know that church should be different, but by all career accounts, it was a step down. It was a step in a different direction. And I knew that. And I didn't even know why. I was not excited about this change. I was not excited about this move. Nothing in me wanted to do it. I didn't understand it, to be honest with you. I did not understand it. When it's talking about, do you perceive it? I perceived that God wanted me to do something new, but I did not perceive what it was and how hard it was going to be. And I remember that we made this trip to this church, and we went to the service that morning to just visit. And while I was there, the band, they sang this hymn that you probably know, saying, "It is well with my soul." And as they were singing that, "It is well," and you're supposed to kind of echo back, "It is well with my soul, with my soul." And then you sing together, so it kind of unifies that. It is well with my soul. And we're sitting just like a few rows back, and I remember I physically could not sing the words. It wasn't there. I could not sing the words because it wasn't well with my soul. I was not happy about this. I did not understand it. And I knew that it was the right thing, and I also knew it was going to be the hardest thing. And it was. And I won't go into gory details of that. But let me just tell you, the couple years that I spent at that church were some of the hardest I've ever spent. It was a miserable situation in so many ways. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what God wanted me to do. But I didn't understand it. Until a couple years later, when for some reason God spoke again and said, basically, this is why I had you here, was so that I could move you there. And what he moved me to was this. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for this, even in the midst of pandemics, even in the midst of planting things. I mean, just how difficult this has been, but how grateful I am for this. This is worth that. And I didn't understand what God was calling me into. I did not see the full picture, but I wanted him to go back to the way it was. I wanted so badly to just stay where I was. I wanted so badly to look back and say, remember when things were better? That was good. I could have stayed there. It would have been comfortable. Things would have been easy. And God moved me into one of the most difficult seasons so that he could move me into one of the best seasons. For us, I think that there's times where God's saying, do you not see it? Don't look back at the former things. Don't look back and think, what if I'm only, at that time I was thinking, what if I'm only 28 years old and my best days are behind me? It's very young to start thinking that way. And we have to believe no matter where you're at right now, no matter what age you are, you're not done. And I firmly believe no matter where you are, whether you're an empty nester, whether you have kids at home, whether you're single, wherever you're at right now, I believe with all of me that your best days are still ahead of you. That's what following Jesus gives us. That's the hope that it gives us. Let's look back at what God has done, but let's forget how he did it so that we can see the new thing that he is putting right in front of us and we don't miss it. So this morning, if you would, let's stand together. We're going to sing for a second. And what I want to do is I want to just pray over us. And what I want you to do as we pray, as we sing, is I want you to ask yourself this question. I want you to think about this. What is the new thing that God is calling me to? What is the new thing that he's putting in front of me? What is this new thing? I want you to think about that for a second. I want you to pray through that. What is the new thing that he is putting in front of me? Let's pray together. Father, I thank you. I thank you for being a God of new things. I thank you for being an eternal creator, but also eternally creative, that you continue to move, that you continue to act, you continue to change things right in our midst. And God, we're sorry for the times that we've missed it, to be honest. We're sorry for the times that we haven't done what we needed to do. where we haven't perceived it, where we continue to be slow to action, slow to following, and we have to realize that you are making a way that looks different than the way before. It looks different than the way we're used to. But during this season, would you remind us that you are making new ways right in front of us? Not all is lost, not all is hopeless. In fact, because we follow you, everything is found, everything is hopeful. Would you make us people of optimism, believing that whatever's ahead of us is better than whatever's behind? And would you remind us that you are now not leading us into the water to go to the wilderness, but maybe you're leading us to the wilderness to bring us water. Maybe you're changing things around, maybe permanently in our lives. And I pray just that we would ask ourselves, what is the new thing you're calling us into? What is it? Today, would we ask ourselves, would we try to perceive what it is that you're doing? Pray that you would help us to understand that today. Would you be with us as we sing, as we remind ourselves of your faithfulness, of what you've done, and we look now to how you're going to do it. Praise things in your name. Amen. You are here and moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here and moving in this place. I worship you. Oh, I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. Oh, I worship you. You are here and moving in this place. Oh, I worship you. Oh, I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. And you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, moving lives around. Oh, I worship you. Oh, I worship you. You are here and mending every heart. Oh, I worship you. I worship you.
darkness, my God, that is who you are.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, whether in person or online. We're so grateful. I am so encouraged by the reminder to take a minute and think, God, what are you doing new right now? What is God doing new in your life? And we love to continue the conversation, right? We always say we don't want the conversation to end here, that Sunday mornings together is just a starting point, right? So if you want to share that with us, we would love to hear what's the new thing that's stirring in you, that God is doing in your life. And then maybe together, as we talk about the new things, maybe together we can start to focus on what God is doing ahead of us, the new things that are coming, the new things he's doing, and not just focusing on what he's done in the past. And so let's do that together. Let's help each other along the way. We would love to hear your stories. You can always reach out to us. My email is janessa@restoretrinity.com, but I love to continue to chat with you throughout the week. So thank you for being here. Let us know if you're coming to movie night on Friday night. We'll be outside of the Stampers. We'd love to have you join us. And then we will see you back here Sunday morning. We hope you have a great week.